Chandraban for psychologist from Laredo, Texas, USA. Next, I would like to welcome all the participants of this webinar, and I hope you enjoy this session. I would like to begin here with a small note about our college. City College is affiliated to Bangalore University and is centrally located in Jayanagar, Bangalore. The college has expanded over the last 2 decades with sophisticated infrastructure, experienced faculty, and strategic tie-ups as a part of the institution's commitment towards quality education in areas of science, computer application, commerce, and management studies. Moving forward, City College aims to achieve par excellence standards in new age education, reinvent and redefine teaching practices. Fast adopt changing technology and teaching methodologies to make our students smart, confident, and responsible individuals. With clarity, commitment, and continuous innovations, we strive not only to become a sought-after education in destination, but also an excellent life coaching hub. I next want to introduce our resource person of the day, Dr. Susan Chandraban Ford. Dr. Susan Chandraban is a licensed psychologist and owner of Chandraban Psychological Services, a group practice in Laredo, Texas. She sees adolescents, adults, couples, and utilizes a cognitive behavioral approach to produce face-to-face and video counseling therapy services. She hails from the Caribbean and has lived in US and Canada for many years. She earned her undergraduate degree from New York University in Toronto, Canada. She earned her PhD in school psychology at the University of South Florida. She has worked in university counseling centers, school district, and outpatient mental health clinics. In addition to providing clinical services, she has presented on various mental health topics in the community and taught in graduate programs in counseling and psychology. She's currently an adjunct faculty member at TAMIU in the Master of Arts in Counseling program and previously served in the same role at the University of Houston. Dr. Khan is passionate and in increasing awareness and knowledge about mental health and providing high quality and effectively mental health services to the public. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today. I hope you find the webinar quite interesting. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Chandraban.
Okay. So, Professor Arun, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you for Dr. Malini and for giving me this opportunity. I actually have a special place in my heart for India. I have family history there and I've traveled there. And actually, Bangalore, where City College is located, is one of the cities I really enjoyed visiting in India. So it's lovely to be here hosted by City College today. So let me share my screen. Okay. So the topic today is coping with long-term stress. So we're going to talk about, oh, excuse me, I'm having some issues with my PowerPoint. I apologize. Okay. So our agenda for today, we'll talk a little bit about the current context of COVID-19, talk about long-term stress, and largely our focus is going to be on healthy coping, ways that we can manage our mental health and stay mentally healthy. And then we'll talk a little bit about some roadblocks that can get us in trouble, recognizing the warning signs of depression and anxiety. And then we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about resources and have some time for questions that I believe Professor Arun is going to moderate. Okay. So I think it's helpful to talk about the current context of COVID-19. We're in this context where we're experiencing most of us are watching things, we're seeing loss of life, we're seeing threats to health, We're experiencing situations like financial threats, job losses, pay cuts. So there's a lot of disruption in our lives. Not only are those things happening, but we're also experiencing things for many of us for the first time, things like lockdowns, having to wear masks, social distancing. So the context is really one of a lot of burdens being imposed on us. In addition to these burdens, there are also a lot of losses. At the same time that we're dealing with all of this, we've also lost access to the thing that for most of us probably really enriches our lives, is fulfilling for our lives, that of social support, family, friends, simple activities, simple things like just being able to visit family and friends and have something like tea and snacks. That's something that's been either denied to us or really limited. Accessing leisure activities that we might enjoy because they involve social contact. So dealing with all of this, a lot of us are experiencing emotions of sadness, anxiety, loneliness, and exhaustion. So when we think of the context of COVID-19, it's really one of ongoing stress. Most of us in our lives individually have experienced various types of stress. Even in the lives of our countries, right? We've experienced things like natural disasters, terrorism. The difference with this pandemic is, though, that with those events, they're typically very time limited. So, the event happens, there's a time limit, it ends, and then we sort of are able to pick up the pieces as a community, as a country, as an individual. With the pandemic, though, the difference is this sort of prolonged, ongoing stress where there's no clear end in sight for us. And the difficulty about this for us is that human beings weren't really designed for this, right? That if you look at human beings in our evolutionary history, our stress response is really the fight or flight response. It's really designed for brief stressors. If you think about us in our evolutionary history, it's something like encountering a predator, and immediately your central nervous system activates to get your body going, fight or flight. What will you do? Hormones like cortisol are released, and you deal with the situation, and then your central nervous system calms everything down again. The problem is, though, with the pandemic is all the things we're experiencing. It's ongoing. There's no clear end in sight. And so it's a situation of chronic stress, and there's continuous activation of the central nervous system. That produces this wear and tear on the body. And there's a lot of research far beyond the scope of this presentation that talks about the effect of that wear and tear on the body, how it affects, for instance, things like immune functioning. But for our purposes, we're really concerned with the emotional effects, right, of chronic stress. And so for a lot of us in this situation, we are feeling anxious, overwhelmed. People tell me things like having panic attacks over very small things. They find that they're really tired. Even though they're in a lockdown situation, they're not really leaving their houses. As an example, they're feeling exhausted. They're having difficulty concentrating. They're not able to focus the way they typically are. In some ways, we can think of this long-term stress accompanying the pandemic as like each of us waking up every morning and putting on a 25-pound vest. And we carry that vest around all day, no matter what we're doing. And it doesn't come off until the end of the day when we're ready to go to bed, and then the next day we put it on again. So there's this sense of real exhaustion, the sense of this weight pulling us down and kind of underlying everything. For people who already struggle with depression and anxiety, we've seen worsening symptoms due to this sort of added chronic stress that they're carrying. So when I talk about this chronic stress and the way it's affecting all of us, and I know a lot of that resonates to all of you watching, it sounds like a lot of gloom and doom, but fortunately, there is hope. So it turns out that there are some very key things that we need to do, that's important for us to do to maintain our mental health, to stay mentally healthy. And I think that's important to say because during the pandemic, a lot of us have been left with this sense that, you know, there's nothing that we can do individually, that there's this overwhelming disease that's killing people, making people sick. We're subject to these lockdowns. We're socially distant. We're missing out on things. And we have so little control over our lives. So I think it's important to say that there are concrete things that we can do, things that are well within our control to keep ourselves mentally healthy. The first is establishing routines. For human beings, we are creatures that having structure, having routine in our lives helps to maintain a sense of well-being. It gives us a sense of control. And that's particularly important in a context where so much feels out of our control. So if at all possible, try to keep a routine similar to the one you had before, particularly with sleep and wake, keeping that same routine. If your typical pattern or routine was to commute at a certain time, to end work at a certain time, try to stick to that routine. I hear from a lot of people struggling with this, that there's a sense that, well, the hours just blend into each other, the days blend into each other because really I can't go out that much, so I'm just at home a lot. But it's important to schedule your day as much as possible, even if you've lost the sort of structure that outings impose, to give yourself that structure as much as possible. Some people have talked to me about this idea that, you know, I'm quarantining or sheltering in place in a really small living space, and that everything sort of starts to blend together, and they find that really affects their mood. And so really trying to use different parts of your living area for different activities, because again, that's going to help give you that sense of structure, of routine that contributes to that sense of control and feelings of well-being. Sleep and exercise. It sounds really basic when I say it, that something so simple that could be key to mental health. But in fact, sleep and exercise, research has told us, are the building blocks of good mental health. As an example, quality sleep, adequate restful sleep, we know that sleep disruptions are really key to mood disorders like depression. So it's really important, even under the best of circumstances, and certainly these are not the best of circumstances, that we are ensuring we have quality sleep, restful sleep, and enough sleep and restful sleep. So again, making sure that we have that consistent sleep-wake time, right? If you're struggling with sleep, one of the key things to do is to, again, get that consistent sleep-wake time, not to fall into what a lot of people are struggling with during the pandemic, of kind of letting everything blend together and letting your sleep routine kind of get way out of whack. And having a slow down routine before bed, sort of slowing down, slowing activities down, to give your brain, give your body, again, that cue that this is bedtime. That will help with quality sleep and adequate sleep. Exercise. Exercise, again, another sort of really, it seems like a really simple thing, but exercise, we know that cardiovascular exercise, any exercise that gets your heart rate, your heart beating faster, about 30 minutes or more, your brain releases endorphins, and endorphins have a positive impact on mood. In fact, exercise is so key that there have been some research studies that have studied people with depression and used the intervention of just exercise and found a significant decrease in depressive symptoms. So during this time, when we're all struggling, we're all feeling overwhelmed, it's hard sometimes to feel motivated to get up and to exercise, but it's important for our mental health to do so. For those who live in areas where their public health authorities have okayed for them to maybe go outside and be able to be in parks and be socially distant, that's socially distant from others, that's great. That's something that you can do. For others, maybe you're in a situation where maybe your particular area has a really strict lockdown and you're not able to really leave home for exercise. But there's so many options these days on places like YouTube, many different types of exercise that you can do at home with just equipment that you have at home. Or if to get really basic, just kind of reaching back to all our primary school experiences where we had to do those calisthenic exercises, and just anything that, you know, gets our heart rate up for a short period of time is enough again to give us that mood boost. Limiting your news intake. This is a tough one, I know, but it's important, right? You know, a lot of us are struggling with this, right? Like, I've had people telling me that I'm just, you know, I get on the internet and I just read article after article about COVID-19, and it's, you know, it's this, it's that, and I just kind of end up down this rabbit hole, and then I feel overwhelmed. And that's the problem with the news intake, right? That either we end up with same old, this, we read the news and we consume tons of it, and then we say to ourselves, oh, everything's bad, it's continued to be bad, it's not changing, and then we feel overwhelmed. Or we say, oh no, it is changing, but there's something new and scarier every day, and then we feel overwhelmed. So when we think about this, about limiting our news intake, we all have to consume the news, right? To stay safe. We have to stay safe, we have to stay informed. But we've got to find that balance between staying informed and being overwhelmed, right? So consider, what do you need to know to be safe, right? You need to know the recommendations of your public health authority, what rules, what changes they're saying for people in your local area to do, and what you need to do to keep you and your family healthy. That's the amount of news essentially that, you know, we all need. So again, striking that balance between being informed and being overwhelmed. Lower your standards. And I know it seems awfully strange for me to be talking to a group of educators, people responsible for upholding high standards, and saying lowering your standards. But remember, we talked about this idea that we are all carrying around this heavy weight, right? That this is chronic stress and it's impacting us. It takes a toll on us. So it's really important to know that none of us are really functioning at the level that we are used to be functioning at. So for instance, you know, we may say, oh, usually of this particular assignment, I can mark 10 of these assignments in maybe an hour. But we find when we sit down to work, we feel tired faster, or focus is more difficult to focus. And it's okay. That makes sense, because again, there's this sort of extra load that we're all carrying. So it's important for us to be compassionate to ourselves. Practically speaking, be flexible with the goals you set. And remember, we are not functioning at the same level that we typically were pre-pandemic, and that's okay. Emotions. This is a really important one, and it's an area I think a lot of people struggle with. So I know I'm saying accepting emotions. A lot of us, when it comes to coping with emotions, struggle with the difficult emotions, particularly emotions like sadness, like anxiousness. We tend to, you can see this reflected in even the ways we talk about emotions to other people and to ourselves. We'll tell other people like, oh, why are you doing this to yourself? Stop stressing out. Don't feel that way. Or we'll say to ourselves like, oh, well, why are you feeling this way? Stop feeling that way. It's weak to feel sad. And unfortunately, those are not very helpful ways of coping with emotions. When we judge our emotions, when we say things like, oh, stop feeling this way, it's weak to feel sad, that judgment results in us feeling shame. And that shame just compounds the original emotion that we felt, and we just end up feeling worse. In fact, it's not helpful. Another way we commonly cope with emotions that's really unhelpful is by avoiding them, dismissing them. Oh, I don't want to feel that. I'm going to distract myself. I'm not going to feel that. And I think we do that because we have this sense that, oh, if I let myself feel my emotions, somehow they're going to overwhelm me. But in fact, by avoiding our emotions, that's problematic, because typically they end up flooding back, or more often sort of coming out in other ways that are unhelpful, like being irritable or annoyed with loved ones, family members. So how do we cope with emotions in a healthy way? It's important for us to practice validation. That is to take a really accepting, non-judgmental stance towards our emotions. When we recognize ourselves feeling anxious, feeling sad, to name that emotion. This is what I feel. It's okay to feel that way. Let yourself feel the emotion, and to tell yourself that emotions come and go. They don't last forever. This too will pass. So we want to take that accepting stance towards our emotions, but we want to balance it also with taking active steps to let them pass. So it's possible to take a balanced approach towards our emotions, accept them, honor them, but also taking active steps that are not about avoidance or distraction. So, for example, recognizing the way you feel, that I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling sad, and doing active things like reaching out to somebody accepting to talk about how you're feeling. Journaling is another great way. Just writing about your feelings is a really helpful way of letting your feelings just run their course. Engaging in opposite action is another healthy way to deal with difficult emotions. By opposite action, I mean emotions typically have action tendencies that accompany them. So as an example, most of us, when we feel sad, the action tendency is to withdraw, to do things like maybe go to our rooms, take a nap, just sort of lie in our beds and maybe kind of just wallow a little bit. And so again, to validate your feeling, you're feeling sad, it's okay, name that emotion, it's okay to feel that way, it will pass, but to engage in an opposite action, doing something like taking a walk, maybe doing a quick meditation, again, maybe reaching out to somebody to talk about how you're feeling. Negative thoughts. So in addition to the overwhelming emotions a lot of us are experiencing, a lot of us are also dealing with really anxious thoughts, right? Questions about finances, thoughts about health, about the future. Often those thoughts take the shape of really sort of anxious, catastrophizing thoughts. What will happen? Things are going to get worse. Everything's going to fall apart. We're kind of predicting this really negative future. And it makes sense. It's a difficult time. In difficult times, people tend towards anxious thinking. But that anxious thinking can often overwhelm us, lead us to feeling sad, feeling anxious. So it's important to challenge those negative thoughts. So to recognize, and a lot of times when we have anxious thoughts, they can feel so overwhelming that they feel like facts. They feel real. But it's important in those moments when we're having those anxious thoughts to step back and to recognize they're thoughts. Thoughts are thoughts. They're not facts. And to ask yourself some probing questions about those thoughts. How true is it? How likely is that? What else do I know that suggests maybe something different? What's another way of viewing that thought? Another way of viewing the situation? What's another maybe more helpful way of viewing things? So again, being able to question those thoughts, right? To treat them like thoughts and not like facts, because that's typically where we get into trouble when we treat anxious thoughts like they're facts. It's also important at a time like this when we feel overwhelmed, things feel unstable, and we're engaging in those catastrophizing thoughts to maintain a present focus. Often catastrophizing thoughts are taking us out forward to the future. And so it's important to sort of consciously, when we find ourselves doing that, pull ourselves back, almost like with a giant rubber band, to pull ourselves back to the present moment. because the present moment is where we live. We don't live in the future. So to gently sort of pull ourselves back and remind ourselves we're in this moment, and to focus on what is actually in our control. To concretely ask ourselves, what can I do in this moment on this day to take care of my mental and physical health? And that's something, viewing it from that perspective will help us feel more empowered, because that's actually within our control at this time in this moment. Staying connected safely. So one of the biggest losses of COVID-19 has been this distancing, right? Not being able to connect with family and friends, not being able to have weddings or go to weddings, depending on the age you are and the area you're in, not being able to go to festivals, not being able to visit with family and friends. And that's tough. So it's important for us to maintain connections with loved ones however we can. I know I hear from people that sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to do another Zoom call or FaceTime call. But it's important that we push ourselves to connect in the ways we can. If you're in an area where your public health authority says, okay, it's okay to have socially distanced outings with distance and masks outdoors, then do that. If you're in an area in and friends and family members. People I've talked to have done things like checking in on elderly neighbors, maybe picking up groceries, picking up things for them that they need. That sense of, taking on that responsibility of checking in, of helping someone else, can really help us to stay connected in a time where disconnection seems to be the default. Meditation. So, in the last probably decade or so, research has really come to recognize what cultural traditions, like as an example, have known about the benefits of meditation for centuries, right? That meditation, in fact, is incredibly beneficial for physical and mental health. And by meditation, of course, we're talking about this idea of letting emotions and thoughts come and go freely without holding on to them, right? Focusing completely on the present and the moment you're in. And there are many different types of meditations out there. There's a lot of different meditation exercises on YouTube, like tons and tons of them, in fact. And just in the course of our day, just stopping for a few minutes to meditate can help you to cope. Some people have found it helpful to maybe start their days with it, to end their days with it, but just a few minutes of meditation can be helpful. Short-term and long-term, when we think about the benefits of meditation, research has been really clear that in the short term, we can feel less stressed. Our moods are improved just in the short term, just doing a short session of meditation. But the long term is, I think, where we really see the benefits of meditation. That research tells us that people who have a consistent meditation practice over time, that they develop an improved ability to tolerate overwhelming thoughts and feelings, that they are able to step back and have some distance between those overwhelming thoughts and feelings. And that's a really important skill when you're dealing with chronic long-term stress, as we are. So I think it's important in this presentation. We've talked about, you know, all these ways that you can cope, and it's important to engage in these healthy coping strategies, right? That these are things that we can do to take care of our mental health. I think it's important to also acknowledge, though, that there comes a point that where we might experience certain things and that we need professional help from a mental health professional. And the two areas I want to highlight are anxiety and depression, because we know that when people struggle with chronic stress, ongoing stress, that the likelihood of developing an anxiety disorder, the likelihood of developing clinical depression is increased. And what do I mean when I say anxiety disorder? Because I think it can be difficult, right? People say, well, everybody's anxious. And that's true. Anxiety is a normal human emotion, and it exists on a continuum. So everybody experiences anxiety at different levels, at different times. But there is a point that it's important to say that if we experience these particular symptoms, that those symptoms could be signs of an anxiety disorder, and at that time it will be important to obtain professional help. So what are those signs? How do I know when maybe my anxiety, that I'm struggling to the point maybe where I do need to seek professional help? If we look at anxiety disorders, they're typically composed of cognitive symptoms, physical symptoms, and behavioral symptoms. So if you observe that you find yourself that you're constantly worried and you can't seem to turn it off, even when it's time to relax with family and with your family in the evening, you still feel anxious and on edge, and there's worries in your head to the point where it feels like a television station or a radio station that you can't turn off. Physical symptoms. If you notice increased heart rate, dizziness, physical symptoms like that accompany your anxious feelings and they're really uncomfortable for you. Behavioral symptoms. If you notice yourself engaging in avoidance behaviors, like constantly checking the news, you feel anxious, your anxiety rises, so you check the news, but your anxiety goes down, but then a couple hours later you're anxious again and you're checking the news. Constantly engaging in these behaviors to decrease anxiety. If you're experiencing any of these signs, then it's time to reach out to a mental health professional. Depression. So again, sadness. Sadness is a normal human emotion, right? That's true. But again, it exists in a continuum with clinical depression being on one end. And what do we mean? How might you know if maybe there might be clinical depression present and you need to reach out to a mental health professional? Persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness that you can't seem to shake, that seem to be sort of constantly there. Unexplained physical pains that you don't have any medical cost, that there's no known medical cost for. Loss of interest in things you used to enjoy. It doesn't seem like you're able to derive pleasure from things anymore. Changes in sleeping patterns. You find that you're sleeping for a lot of hours in the day, it's significantly increased. Or maybe you find that you have a lot of difficulty sleeping and you're only sleeping a few hours a night. Changes in appetite and body weight. You've lost interest in food, you're losing weight, or your eating has increased significantly and you've gained a significant amount of weight in a short period of time. Behavioral changes. In men particularly, depression can often look a little bit different. For a lot of men, it often manifests as irritability, anger, outbursts, sort of being very controlling with situations. And suicidal thoughts. Any thoughts about sort of, oh, I'd rather not be here, it would be easier not to be here, and especially thoughts where you're making a plan for ending your life. It's important, if you recognize these symptoms, to again reach out and contact a mental health professional. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about resources, right? Because I'm a big believer that it's great to attend a presentation and hear some, some good ideas, but it's also good to leave with concrete resources that you can continue to use long after this presentation. The first is website listing for NGOs and helplines. And a big thank you to Professor Arun, because she was the one who researched this and shared it with me. But it's a great website. I've gone through it. They have NGOs, helplines all over India and all the different regions of India. And I think it's important to say during this time, because I've heard from a lot of people, well, I guess I can't get mental health help. I guess I can't get any counseling because of the pandemic, because we're in lockdowns, we have to socially distance. And it's important to know that there is help available. That in fact, mental health professionals have been very creative during the pandemic about finding ways to provide help to folks. Zoom groups, using FaceTime, phone counseling, video counseling using various platforms. So lockdowns and social distancing are not a reason or they're not a barrier to you obtaining mental health care. So I encourage you to consult that list if you are experiencing any of those symptoms of depression or anxiety, or you're struggling with self-harm thoughts. COVID Coach. This is a mental health app developed by the Veteran Affairs Agency, the VA here in the US, and it's a great tool. It has tools for monitoring mood and anxiety. It asks little questions. Are you feeling this way? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling sad? And then it offers tips that are appropriate, tips to help you with managing anxiety. It even has built-in meditation exercises. And it's easily accessible. Just search for COVID Coach on your phone's app store. I've included a couple of links to some short mindfulness meditations on YouTube. These are ones that are tried and true that I've done repeatedly with clients, and they found extremely helpful to them. So I really recommend these. But of course, there are a lot of other ones on there. And often I find with meditation that sometimes people maybe have to try a couple until they find one that kind of feels like a fit for them. Talking to kids about COVID-19. A lot of parents have asked me, like, I'm not quite sure how to talk to my kids about this, being in lockdown, coming out of lockdown, maybe going back to school. There are all these different things that, I'm not sure how to talk to my kids of different ages about. And I think this is a really helpful resource. It's an outline on the National Association of School Psychologists website here in the US, offering really great guidance to parents about concrete guidance about how you talk to kids about COVID-19 and kids of different ages also. Again, on that theme of talking to kids, the UN published a great COVID-19 children's book, and it's online, easily available. Again, sort of using a story format to kind of educate kids about COVID-19. What's wonderful too is that it's in English, but it's of course in Hindi also, but it's also in other languages like Kannada, also Tamil, Telugu, and Punjabi. And I've included a link to the website where you can find the listing of languages it's available in. And finally, our practice here in Laredo, we blog in a variety of mental health topics, the clinicians here, anxiety, depression, trauma, relationships. So that's always a free resource that anybody is able to access at any time. So I think we're at the point for questions. I'm going to stop my share to go back to Professor Arun now.
Yeah, Dr. Chandrabam, thank you so much for the wonderful information and quite an encouraging session here. Yeah, we have a couple of questions here from some participants. The first one is, you talked about how do we talk counsels to kids here, and we would like to know how do we talk to old age people, or how do we take care of old age generation in this kind of situation, because it seems like they have lost so much during this session, because they have no outings to go out, and Yeah, and they are, like, because old age, it's like 60 and above, they are banned here. So how do we, talk to them or counsel them?
I think that, again, I think it goes back to the idea of validating feelings, right? That there's nothing you can do to problem solve their feelings. And I think sometimes in situations like this, where there is something that has happened and it's difficult and we can't change it, our tendency is to want to say, oh, you know, to try to problem solve things, or to say that, oh, well, this is the way it is. But I think for older people struggling with this, they're struggling with a lot of loss and grief. And so we need to sit with them, we need to listen to them, we need to talk to them, right? To validate their feelings, to give them a chance to talk about what it's like for them. And as much as possible, to give them those chances to help them with technology. For a lot of older folks, they may struggle a little more with technology, but to be able to help them connect as much as possible, maybe with those extended family members and friends that they're not able to see. So doing what we can to facilitate the connections in the way that we can, while also just respecting how they're feeling and giving them a chance to talk about that.
Well, thank you so much. We have another question from Dr. Pratibha from SV College here. The pandemic is going to prevail for a long time, and this is going to be the new normal life for a long time now. So, will it be easy for us to shift back to older days when all this ends?
So that's a question, and I think that's a big question. And I think I read them too. I'm sure you do, Dr. Pratibha, that there are all these sort of people offering opinions and analyses about how this will change us as a society and how we might shift and change. And I don't know. I would like to take an optimistic view of that question. And I would like to say that maybe one of the things that I hope we come out of the pandemic with is placing more value on connections to others and realizing how important that is, and that maybe it was something that we took for granted when we were so busy staring at our screens and phones. And that now that we've lost that chance to connect, that we will come out of the pandemic having more respect and value for that. So I'll take that optimistic view. Whether I'm right or not, it remains to be seen.
Thank you so much. We have a question here from Mr. Srinivas Murthy. He says that teachers are the ones who have been affected a lot. From classroom to online teaching, they have to accept new regimes in life. So, can you please suggest some tips for teachers, from professors, teachers, faculty members? How do they overcome the stress level? Learn from learning new things to adjusting to new phenomena like salary cuts, reductions, all those things.
I think that you have to be patient with yourself, right? I think in particular, and I really empathize with your question because I myself am teaching the semester online for the first time in a long time. And so I have also struggled with this. I think you have to be patient with yourself, that you're going to make mistakes, that you're going to feel overwhelmed, and accept that. And I think you have to be honest with your students that this is new to me. I've told my students, this is new to me. I'm going to need your help as we go forward. And that, that we're all in this together. It's a difficult time, and acknowledge that, be compassionate to yourself, and be honest that, you need some help and patience from your students in navigating things. And I've been actually really impressed by students, how open and willing to be patient and to help they have been. And I'm sure it will be the same there also.
Ma'am, I would like to ask you, see, is that the trust level differ from India and USA? I'm talking about academic wise, between among the teachers.
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat the question? I had a little bit of trouble with the audio.
Is the trust level among the teacher community differ from US and Indian environment?
I'm not sure, because I actually have never taught in India. So I couldn't say. I can only speak for what it's like here in terms of our syllabi and sort of like the way we approach and or tend to approach and organize things here.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes.
here's a very interesting question from Professor Geeta, and she asks about breakups, because this is one stage, especially the new generation, where they are not able to give time, ample quality time face to face, and where they have to just have a virtual relationship here. So how do you suggest, with the new breakup counseling here?
Hi. So I think if you're, how do you counsel a young person through a breakup? So
Yeah.
helpful. Again, I think a lot of times adults tend to, when they're talking to young people about their love relationships, the breakups, to kind of say, oh, you'll get over this. It's not a big deal. And I think if you take the approach of saying, wow, just validating their feelings, that must be really sad for you. It must be really hard. And what do you miss most about the person? Just listening and asking questions, empathizing. That will go a long way towards helping them cope with a breakup.
We have another question from Professor Chandana Harsha from National College, Jayanagar. She asks here, is cognitive and social development of children are being stunned when being indoors. They're not allowed outdoors at all. So children are suffering from stress. So what do you how do you deal with this, or how do we deal with this?
I think that is, that's a really difficult thing for dealing with young kids. And I think it depends on the age of your kids, but I think the best you can do is to find stimulating educational activities as best you can using things like the internet. So I know, for instance, for some young kids, like, over here, preschool teachers and parents have done activities like, okay, we'll do a unit on the clouds. And so we'll look at a lot of videos on clouds and we'll learn about that. As much as possible, trying to create stimulating educational activities for them to keep their minds busy. I think that's the best you can do in this situation. Because as you said, sometimes they're just not allowed to leave the house due to lockdown.
Okay, thank you so much. Over to Dr. Malini, ma'am.
Nagashri ma'am, I
Yes,
think you
ma'am.
finish off with wind off the session with formal vote of thanks.
Okay. So I request Professor Yusuf to kindly give in the vote of thanks.
Yes.
Professor Yusuf, yeah, can you just come on board?
Yeah. So good morning, everyone. I'm Mohammad Yusuf M, Assistant Professor from Department of Management Studies. Take the privilege to give vote of thanks. I would like to thank our today's resource person, Dr. Suzanne Chandrabanford, for enlightening us on topic, life interrupted coping with long-term stress, and also for sharing valuable knowledge regarding healthy coping. I also extend most sincere thanks to our young and dynamic leader, Ms. Monica Kalluri, Vice President, City College, for her support to conduct this webinar. Also, I thank our supportive principal, ma'am, Dr. Malini N, City College, for her continuous support for conducting this webinar and making it successful. I also extend a heartfelt gratitude to all the participants for joining this webinar and making it a grand success. Last but not the least, I thank all the team CCJ members for working together to make this webinar a great success. This is Mohammad Yusuf signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yusuf,
Yes, ma'am.
feedback link, maybe you can mention those details
Yes,
to the participants.
yeah. Dear participants, will be posting the feedback link on both WhatsApp group as well as on Zoom. So you can fill the feedback form. Should receive.